You know how to push his buttons, my mother whispered, while I sat on the bathroom floor at 14, pressing a cold washcloth to my ribs. That was the sentence I grew up hearing. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "He had no right." Just, "You know how to push his buttons." Like the bruises were a choice I made. For 18 years, every time my father hit me, my mother waited until he left the room and said some version of that line. And for 18 years, I believed her. I believed I was the problem. The day I moved out, she called and told me I was destroying the family. I said, "You watched him destroy me for 18 years and said nothing." She hung up. 6 months of silence. Then she called again, crying. And she said something I never expected to hear from her. It wasn't an apology, it was bigger than that. And it changed everything. Before I go on, if this story resonates with you, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with what I'm about to tell you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. My name is Megan. I'm 24. I'm a nurse at a small community hospital in Ohio. Now let me take you back to the summer I turned 14. The summer I finally understood that my mother was never going to protect me. If you drove past our house on Maple Ridge Lane, you'd think you were looking at the most American family on the block. White colonial with black shutters. A lawn so even it looked like Richard Moore mowed it with a ruler. Which, honestly, he might have. There was always a flag on the porch, always a wreath on the door that matched the season, and always a Ford F-250 in the driveway, washed every Saturday morning before anyone else on the street was awake. My father was a deacon at Grace Baptist Church. He owned a small construction company, about 15 guys, mostly commercial renovations and municipal contracts. He coached Little League for 3 years, not because he loved baseball, but because the parents on the bleachers were the same people who sat on the town zoning board. Everything Richard Moore did had an audience, and every audience had a purpose. My mother, Linda, was the woman who always showed up to potluck with a warm casserole and a cardigan buttoned to the collar. Hair pinned, smile soft, voice low. She called every man sir and every woman sweetheart. And if you'd asked anyone in town to describe her, they would have said, devoted wife, good Christian woman. And then there was me, the quiet girl in the third pew every Sunday, sitting between my parents with my hands folded on my lap, wearing long sleeves in July. Nobody asked why. Not once. Not the Sunday school teachers, not the neighbors, not the women who told my mother what a beautiful family she had. Nobody looked past the flag on the porch, or the mowed lawn, or my father's handshake. Firm enough to make men respect him, gentle enough to fool everyone else. If you'd driven past our house, you would have been wrong about us. Everyone was. The first time I remember it clearly, I was 10. I'd forgotten to wash the dishes after dinner. Not refused. Forgotten. I was doing homework at the kitchen table and the plates were still in the sink when my father came back from the garage. He didn't yell. That's what people never understand. Richard Moore didn't raise his voice. He pulled his chair back from the table slowly, set both hands flat on the wood, and said, in that low, even tone that still makes my spine lock, "Come here." The bedroom door closed. What happened behind it? I'm not going to describe. I'll just tell you that the next morning, I counted 3 bruises below my ribs on the left side, and I learned to wash the dishes before I sat down to do anything else. What I remember most isn't the pain. It's what came after. My mother walked into my room maybe 20 minutes later after his truck pulled out of the driveway. She sat on the edge of my bed. She didn't look at the bruises. She looked at my face, and she whispered, "You know Daddy doesn't like dirty dishes. Why do you keep pushing him?" Like I had pressed a button. Like what happened to me was a natural consequence of my own carelessness. I was 10. My brother Ethan was 4 at the time. He was in the living room watching cartoons while it happened. My father never touched him. Not once, back then. Ethan was the son, the one who carried the name, the one my father called Buddy, and took to job sites on Saturdays. I used to think the difference between us was simple. Ethan was good, and I was the problem. It took me 14 more years to understand that wasn't true. By the time I was 14, I'd been to the emergency room 3 times. Each visit had the same script. My mother drove. My father came along. Calm, concerned, his hand resting on my shoulder like a father in a Hallmark movie. "She's so clumsy," Linda told the intake nurse, "always running around, never looking where she's going." And she'd laugh, that soft practiced laugh. And the nurse would smile back. Because why wouldn't she? The man standing next to us was a church deacon. He coached Little League. He smelled like Old Spice and fresh sawdust. The third visit, though, I remember the doctor pausing. She looked at my arm, then at my chart, then at me. I could feel her question before she asked it. "Is someone hurting you?" My father's hand tightened on my shoulder. Not hard enough for the doctor to see, just hard enough for me to feel. "She fell down the stairs again," he said and smiled. "I keep telling her, no running in socks." The doctor wrote something in the chart. I found out years later what it said. Recurrent injuries inconsistent with stated mechanism. Recommend CPS follow-up. But CPS never came. In a town where Richard Moore had shaken hands with everyone from the fire chief to the county clerk, a note in a chart was just a note in a chart. I didn't know it then, but that chart, those 5 visits, each one documented with dates, descriptions, and a doctor's observations, was sitting in a medical record system, waiting. Not for a lawyer, not for a courtroom. Just for the day I'd be old enough, and informed enough, to ask for it. That day was still 10 years away. But the paper trail had already begun. At 16, I got a part-time job at the pharmacy on Grant Street. I didn't ask my father's permission. I asked my school counselor to sign the work permit, told him it was for college savings, and started bagging prescriptions 3 afternoons a week at $9.25 an hour. My father found out within a week. He didn't like it. Not because he cared about my schedule, but because a girl with her own paycheck is a girl with options, and Richard Moore did not raise his children to have options he didn't control. "No daughter of mine needs to work," he said at dinner. His voice was pleasant. His eyes weren't. "People will think I can't provide." I kept the job. I kept every dollar in a shoebox under my bed, tucked behind a stack of old textbooks. By the end of 6 months, I had $412, enough for a security deposit on the smallest apartment in the county, if I ever needed one. My mother saw the shoebox once. I came home and found her standing in my room, staring at it on my desk like it was a grenade. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me with this expression I couldn't decode. Part fear, part something else. Envy, maybe. Or recognition. Like she was looking at a version of herself that had made a different choice at 22. Then my father found it. He took every dollar, counted it at the kitchen table in front of me, folded the bills into his wallet, and said, "Money earned under my roof belongs to this household." I didn't cry that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I started hiding cash inside a tampon box in the bathroom cabinet, and I started counting days. At 17, I had saved enough for a deposit and first month's rent on a studio apartment 2 towns over. I'd been accepted into the nursing program at the community college. I applied without telling anyone, used the school library computer, and had the acceptance letter sent to a P.O. box I'd rented for $11 a month. But mail is a fragile thing in a house where one person controls everything. The day the second copy of my financial aid summary arrived, the one I'd accidentally had sent to the house, my father was the one who opened the mailbox. He brought the envelope to dinner, set it next to the salt shaker. Didn't mention it until we were all seated, forks in hand, steam rising from the mashed potatoes my mother had spent an hour making. "What's this?" he asked. His voice was conversational, almost curious. I looked at the envelope. My stomach dropped. "It's mine," I said. He opened it slowly, read it. Then he looked at me, not angry, not yet, and said, "You think you're leaving?" It wasn't a question. Nobody in this family makes a decision without going through me. He tore the letter. Slowly. One clean rip down the middle, then another. 4 pieces, laid neatly beside his plate like a place setting. My mother cut her meat. Ethan, 11, small for his age, stared at his plate. Nobody spoke. After dinner, I went to my room and called the admissions office from under my blanket. "I need a replacement copy," I whispered. The original was damaged. The woman on the other end paused, then gently, "We'll send a new one to whatever address you'd like, sweetheart." I gave her the P.O. box number. I left on my 18th birthday. My father was at a job site. I'd checked his schedule the night before. A commercial renovation 40 minutes away. Wouldn't be back until 6. My mother was in the kitchen. I had 2 suitcases, a backpack, and my friend Rachel's Honda idling at the curb. I carried the first suitcase down the stairs and my mother didn't turn around. She was standing at the counter, her back to me, washing a dish that was already clean. "If you leave," she said, "who's going to help me with dinner?" It wasn't really about dinner. I know that now. It was the only way Linda Moore knew how to say please don't go without admitting why she needed me to stay. If I was in the house, I was the lightning rod. If I left, the lightning would have to land somewhere else. I set the suitcase by the door and walked to Ethan's room. He was sitting on his bed, 12 years old, trying not to cry. I knelt in front of him and held both his hands. "I'm going to come back for you," I said. "I promise." He nodded. He didn't ask me to stay. Even at 12, he understood that staying meant something worse than missing me. I hugged him, picked up my bags, walked to the front door. My mother never turned around, but when I got to Rachel's car and looked back at the house, just once, I saw her standing behind the living room curtain, one hand pressed flat against the glass, watching. For 1 second, the curtain stayed open. Then it fell. That was the last time I saw my mother for 6 months. 3 weeks after I left, I was sitting on the floor of my studio apartment, mattress on the ground, 1 lamp from Goodwill, curtains I'd bought at the IKEA clearance rack for $7. And for the first time in my life, I noticed something. Silence. Not the kind of silence that comes before a door slams, the kind that just exists. Peaceful. Ordinary. Then my phone rang. My mother's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer. But some part of me, the part that had spent 18 years hoping she'd choose me, picked up. She didn't ask how I was. Didn't ask about the apartment, the job, the program. She went straight to it. "Your father isn't eating. He's not sleeping. The house feels wrong without you." A pause. Then, "You're destroying this family, Megan. Do you know what people at church are saying?" I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, and I felt something shift. Not anger exactly. Something quieter. Clarity. "You watched him destroy me for 18 years and said nothing," I said. "Don't call me to say I'm the one breaking things." Silence. Not the good kind. Then a click. She hung up. I set the phone on the floor beside me, leaned my head against the wall, stared at the water stain on the ceiling. It looked like a map of somewhere I'd never been. I didn't cry. I think I'd used up all my crying somewhere between age 10 and 17, and there was nothing left. Just a hollow, ringing quiet. I thought she'd call back. That night, the next day, that week. She didn't. 6 months of nothing. I finished my first year of nursing school with a 3.7 GPA and a permanent knot between my shoulder blades from working double shifts at the nursing home on Route 9. My apartment was small but clean. A succulent on the windowsill, a second-hand bookshelf, scrubs drying on a rack by the radiator. It wasn't much, but every object in that room was something I'd chosen, and that made it more mine than any bedroom I'd ever had on Maple Ridge Lane. I tried to call Ethan. 3 times. Each time it went to voicemail. The 4th time, a text came back from my father's number. "Stop calling this phone." Richard had taken Ethan's cell. Of course he had. You can't control a boy if his sister keeps reminding him there's a world outside the house. At night, alone, I'd lie in bed and think, is he okay? Is Ethan sitting in that room right now? counting the cracks on the ceiling the way I used to. And then, the harder question, the one that sat on my chest like a stone. Did I abandon him? One evening, I was scrolling through Facebook, not something I did often, and I saw the Grace Baptist Church page. A photo of my father, grinning wide, arm around Pastor David, standing in front of a banner I had to read twice to believe, 2025 Man of the Year nominee, Richard Moore. Below the photo, a comment from Linda's account. So proud of this man and this family. God is good. The family in that photo was 3 people. I'd been cropped out. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed the app, turned off the light, and lay in the dark, listening to the silence that used to feel safe. That silence felt different now. And then, 11 at night, mid-October, my phone rang again. I almost didn't recognize her voice at first, not because it had changed, but because I'd never heard my mother cry. Not like this. Not raw, uncontrolled, the kind of sound that comes out when you've held something inside so long it breaks the container. Megan. Her voice cracked on the second syllable. Megan, please don't hang up. I didn't speak. I just held the phone. He started hitting Ethan. The room tilted. I pressed my hand flat against the mattress to steady myself, like the floor might actually move. When? I asked. After you left. Slowly at first, shoving, grabbing. Ethan talked back about going to prom with his friends. Your father... She couldn't finish the sentence. She tried again. He hit him, Megan. Hard. Like he used to hit me. She couldn't say it. But we both heard it. And then she said the thing. The sentence I had replayed 1,000 times since, the one I never in my life expected to hear from Linda Moore. I recorded it. On my old phone. I have the audio. His voice. What he said. All of it. Megan, I was wrong. About everything. About all of it. I'm so sorry. I sat on the edge of my mattress in the dark, and I felt something crack open inside me that I thought had healed shut years ago. Not forgiveness. I wasn't there yet. Not relief. Something more complicated. Like watching someone you'd given up on take one single step in the right direction and not knowing whether to feel hope or grief for the 18 years of steps that never came. Send me the file, I said, tonight, and don't delete it. She sent it at 11:47 p.m., 4 minutes and 22 seconds long. I moved fast. The next morning, I called a legal aid office 2 counties over, far enough that nobody would know the Moore name, and explained my situation. The attorney, a woman named Janet, listened without interrupting, then said, You have options. But your father has a head start on the narrative, and in small towns, narrative is everything. She was right, because while I was making phone calls and researching restraining orders, Richard was doing what Richard does best, managing the story. Within a week, the version of events circulating through Grace Baptist Church went like this. Megan Moore, troubled since adolescence, possibly using substances, mentally unstable, trying to tear apart a God-fearing family for reasons no one could quite explain. Richard had told Pastor David in private, voice heavy with fatherly concern, that he'd tried everything, that he prayed for me every night, that he feared I was going down a dangerous path. Pastor David called me to check in. His tone was careful, pastoral, but I could hear the shape of my father's words underneath his questions. Your father says you've been going through a hard time, Megan. Is there anything the church can do? It spread beyond the church. A co-worker at the hospital, a woman I barely knew, stopped me in the break room. Hey, I heard you're dealing with some family stuff. You okay? Someone mentioned... She trailed off, embarrassed. In a town of 14,000 people, reputation moves faster than truth. And my father had spent 3 decades building his, brick by careful brick. Who was going to believe a 24-year-old nurse over a deacon who'd poured the foundation for the church's new fellowship hall with his own crew? At cost? Nobody. Not yet. The thing about Richard Moore is that he doesn't just control people. He controls their exits. And Ethan's exit had a price tag, $38,000. That was the savings account my parents had built since Ethan was born. College fund, every birthday check from Grandma Dot, every tax refund bonus, all of it sitting in a savings account at First National, under Richard's name. Legally, that money was his to do whatever he wanted with, and he knew it. Ethan called me from a friend's phone one night, voice barely above a whisper. He'd been accepted into an engineering program. Good school, reasonable tuition, 2 hours from home, a real way out. He sat me down at the kitchen table. Ethan said. He didn't yell. He was calm. He said, "You want this money? You do what I say. No contact with your sister. You don't tell anyone what happens in this house. And you come to the Man of the Year ceremony. You wear the suit I bought you, and you smile." I closed my eyes. "Meg, I need that money. I can't afford it without it. I don't know what to do." There it was. The leash. The same one Richard had used on me, just with a bigger number attached. He wasn't a father saving for his son's future. He was a man who understood that the cheapest prison is the one you build out of someone else's hope. "Don't do anything yet," I told Ethan. "Don't agree. Don't refuse. Just wait." After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote 3 things. 1. ER records, my right to request them. 2. Linda's audio recording, Ohio, one-party consent. 3. I needed a stage, and Richard had just built me one. 2 days later, my phone rang. Not my mother this time, my father. His voice was warm, relaxed, the voice he used at church barbecues and town council meetings, the one designed to make you forget he was capable of anything else. "Megan, sweetheart." He hadn't called me that in years. "I know we've had our differences, but I want to put that behind us. The church is doing a Man of the Year dinner next Saturday. The whole congregation's going to be there, 200 people, maybe more. I want our family up on that stage together. All 4 of us. Show everybody the Moores are solid." I held the phone and said nothing. "Pastor David thinks it'd be real meaningful," he continued. "The prodigal daughter comes home. People love that story." I understood exactly what this was. Not an olive branch, a stage direction. Richard needed the image of his family intact, his daughter, returned, smiling, standing beside him. Because the rumors he'd planted about me only worked if I stayed away. If I came back willingly, that proved it was all in my head. That proved he was the good father. Case closed. If I said no, he'd tell the whole town, "See? She's too far gone. Even her own father can't reach her." If I said yes, I'd walk back into his frame and disappear inside it. Either way, he won. Unless I came with a different script. "I'll be there, Dad," I said. He exhaled. Relieved. Victorious, even. "That's my girl." I hung up and stared at the wall. My hands weren't shaking. For the first time in my life, they weren't shaking before a conversation with my father. He'd invited me onto his stage. He didn't know I was bringing my own. The plan was simple, but it relied on people who'd spent their whole lives being anything but brave. I called my mother the next evening, told her what I was going to do. Bring the medical records, play the audio, and let the truth stand in front of the same 200 people my father had spent 30 years performing for. "I need you there," I said. "I'm not asking you to speak. I'm just asking you to stand." The silence on the other end lasted so long I checked to see if the call had dropped. "Megan, I can't." Her voice was small. The same voice she used at the dinner table when my father asked why the roast was dry, or the laundry wasn't folded, or the house wasn't quiet enough. The voice of a woman who'd been trained year by year to make herself as small as possible. You don't know what he'll do. Everyone in that church trusts him. They'll look at me like like you're what, Mom? Like I let it happen." I let that sit. Because she did. And she knew it. And that knowledge was either going to paralyze her or push her forward, and I couldn't make that choice for her. "You did let it happen," I said, not to be cruel, because it was true, and if we were going to stand in a room full of people and tell the truth, We had to start by telling it to each other. But you also pressed record. And that matters. Another silence. Longer. I'll try, she whispered. I'll try to be there. I hung up knowing that try wasn't a promise. My entire plan depended on a woman who'd spent 28 years learning how to disappear, and I was asking her to be visible. The next morning, I drove to the county hospital where I'd been taken 5 times before the age of 16. I knew the building. I knew the system. I was a nurse. I'd spent 2 years working inside healthcare records infrastructure, and I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Under HIPAA, every patient has the legal right to request their own medical records. No court order needed. No lawyer required. Just a signed authorization form and valid ID. The Health Information Management Office was in the basement. Fluorescent lights, beige carpet, a desk stacked with file boxes. The woman behind it was in her 60s, reading glasses on a chain, name tag that said, Barb. I need copies of my records, I said. Emergency department visits. All of them. She looked at my ID, typed my name, and paused. Then she took off her glasses and looked at me. Really looked. The way nobody in this town had looked at me when I was 10, or 12, or 14. I remember your name, she said quietly. 5 ER visits before you turned 16. I always wondered what happened to you. I didn't answer that. I didn't need to. Standard processing is 7 to 10 business days, she said. The dinner you're talking about, the one at Grace Baptist? I hadn't told her about the dinner. She shook her head slightly. Small town, honey. Everybody knows about that dinner. She turned back to her computer. I'll have these ready by Thursday. Thursday was 2 days before the ceremony. I walked out with a receipt and a timeline. The records would show 5 visits, 3 with the same notation. Injuries inconsistent with accidental mechanism. 1 with a recommendation for CPS follow-up that never happened. Paper has a long memory, even when people choose to forget. 2 days before the ceremony, Richard Moore threw a barbecue. I heard about it from Ethan, who whispered into his friend's phone from the backyard while my father stood at the grill, holding court. A dozen men from the church, elders, deacons, committee chairs, eating pulled pork and laughing at Richard's jokes in the same backyard where, 6 weeks earlier, he'd grabbed Ethan by the collar hard enough to tear the stitching. He's telling everyone you're coming home, Ethan whispered. He keeps saying, my daughter's finally coming back. Thank the Lord. They're all congratulating him. That evening, I opened Facebook. The Grace Baptist Church page had a new post. A family photo from 8 years ago. Me at 16, Ethan at 10, Linda in the middle, Richard's arm around all of us, everyone smiling. The caption read, Family is everything, through thick and thin. God is good. 87 likes, 22 comments, hearts, prayer emojis. What a blessing. Pastor David called me that night. Megan, your father is so happy you agreed to come. I think this could be a real turning point for your family. The congregation is looking forward to seeing you all together. I listened. I thanked him. I hung up. And I sat in my apartment, looking at the manila envelope on my kitchen table, the one Barb had expedited, and the phone beside it with a 4-minute and 22-second audio file, and I felt the weight of what I was about to do. Richard Moore had spent the entire week turning his Man of the Year ceremony into a redemption story. The wayward daughter returns. The family heals. The patriarch's love conquers all. Everyone claps. He'd written the script, cast the roles, built the stage. He just forgot that I'd learned to read. The night before the ceremony, I almost didn't go through with it. I sat at my kitchen table past midnight staring at the records. 5 ER visits, typed out in clinical language, dates, descriptions, the doctor's careful notations. Next to them, my phone, loaded with 4 minutes and 22 seconds of my father's voice doing exactly what he'd done my entire childhood, only this time to his son. And I thought, what if I'm wrong? Not wrong about the facts. Those were printed in black and white. But wrong about the outcome. What if I stood up in that room and 200 people looked at me the way they'd looked at me my whole life. Like I was the problem? My phone buzzed. Ethan, calling from his friend's phone again. Meg. His voice was barely a whisper. Dad made me try on the suit tonight. He said if I say one wrong word tomorrow, he's pulling every dollar from the account. A pause. He measured my tie, Meg. He actually stood there and measured my tie with a ruler to make sure it was straight. I closed my eyes. I can't do this anymore, he said. I can't sit up there and smile. I can't pretend we're okay. Because we're not okay. We haven't been okay my whole life. And in his voice, I heard myself. 14, sitting on a bathroom floor. 16, hiding cash in a tampon box. 18, walking out a door and not looking back. Except I did look back. And the curtain fell. You won't have to smile tomorrow, I said. I promise. I wasn't going to the ceremony for revenge. I was going because I'd made a promise to a 12-year-old boy 6 years ago, and I was not going to break it. Saturday morning. I laid everything out on the kitchen table. The manila envelope. 5 pages of medical records. Each one stamped with the hospital's seal. Dates ranging from age 9 to 15. Clinical language that said what no one in my family ever would. My phone, fully charged. Linda's audio file synced and tested. A small Bluetooth speaker, the portable kind, the size of a coffee cup, tucked into my bag. I called Janet at Legal Aid one last time. If I play a recording that my mother made in her own home, in front of a public gathering, am I breaking any laws? Ohio is a one-party consent state, she said. Your mother made the recording. She consented. It's legal. And if I share my own medical records publicly? They're your records, Megan. You can do whatever you want with them. I exhaled. I chose my clothes carefully. A plain white button-up shirt, black slacks, flat shoes. No jewelry, no makeup beyond what I'd wear to a shift at the hospital. I wanted to look exactly like what I was. A 24-year-old nurse who works 60 hours a week and pays her own rent. Not the troubled daughter my father had described. Not a victim performing grief. Just a woman telling the truth in clean, simple clothes. I called my mother one final time. Mom, you don't have to say anything. You just have to be there. But if you want to speak, you speak. Her breathing was uneven. Okay. Okay, you'll be there, or okay, you'll try. A long pause. I'll be there. I slid the envelope into my bag, zipped it shut, picked up my keys. The ceremony started at 6. It was noon. 6 more hours of silence. And then, for the first time, I was going to break it. At 2 in the afternoon, my phone rang. Grandma Dot calling from the road. I'm an hour out, she said. Her voice had that steel and gravel quality it always had. 72 years old, widowed, lived alone in a 2-bedroom house outside Columbus, and still the only person in my family who'd ever called things by their real names. Dorothy Jennings had tried to save us once before. When I was 8, she'd come for a weekend visit. I was wearing a t-shirt, rare for me, even then, and when I reached up to grab a glass from the cabinet, the sleeve pulled back, and she saw the bruises. She didn't say anything to me. She went straight to my mother. I was in the next room. I heard everything. Linda, what happened to that child's arm? She fell, Mom. She's clumsy. Linda, I gave birth to you. Don't lie to me. My mother cried. But she didn't leave. Dot called CPS herself. A caseworker came, asked some questions, and left. My father handled it. The same way he handled the ER reports, the same way he handled everything. With handshakes, with charm, with the quiet machinery of a man who knows everyone in a small town. After that, Dot was no longer welcome at the house on Maple Ridge. 16 years later, she was driving 2 hours on a Saturday afternoon to sit in a folding chair at the back of a church fellowship hall and watch her granddaughter do what she couldn't. I've waited 16 years for someone to do what I didn't have the power to do, she said over the phone, her voice steady. I will be in that room, Megan. Whatever happens, I will be there. I told her I loved her. She told me to drive safe. That was enough. The fellowship hall at Grace Baptist Church smelled like carnations and lemon polish. Round tables draped in white linen. Paper programs at each seat. Gold lettering, a cross at the top, and in the center, Man of the Year Award, honoring Richard Moore. A podium at the front with a microphone, flanked by 2 flower arrangements and a banner that must have cost $300. The banner read, Faith, Family, Service. I almost laughed. 200 people filled the room. Church elders, their wives, families from the congregation, business associates, a few local officials. The kind of crowd that runs a small town, not by law, but by handshake. My father knew every person in that room. He'd built a deck for one, donated materials for another's garage, sponsored a third's daughter on a mission trip. Every favor was an investment, and tonight was his dividend. Richard stood near the front table in a navy suit, red tie, gold cufflinks that caught the light when he gestured, which he did often, because Richard Moore speaks with his whole body when there's an audience. Linda stood beside him in a pale floral dress, hands clasped in front of her, eyes lowered. Ethan sat stiffly in a chair that looked like it might swallow him, wearing a suit he clearly hadn't picked out, his tie measured to military precision. I walked in at 6:15, alone. Richard saw me from across the room. His face lit up, for the audience's benefit, and he crossed the hall with his arms open. There she is. Everyone, my daughter's here. He hugged me. 200 people watched. A few clapped. I didn't return the hug. I didn't pull away either. I just stood still, arms at my sides, feeling his hands on my back. In my bag, the manila envelope pressed against my hip. Dot sat at a table in the back, watching. At 7 o'clock, Pastor David stepped to the podium. Tonight we honor a man who has served this church and this community with unwavering dedication. A man of faith, a man of family, a man whose hands have literally built the walls around us. Laughter, applause. Please welcome our Man of the Year, Richard Moore. Standing ovation. 200 people on their feet. My father walked to the podium the way he walked into every room, shoulders square, chin up, eyes sweeping the crowd like a man surveying land he owned. He gripped the podium and smiled. Thank you, Pastor David. Thank you, Grace Baptist. He paused, measured, the way he always paused, not because he needed to collect his thoughts, but because he understood that silence creates anticipation. This past year has tested my family. Some of you know, my daughter and I had a rough patch. A sympathetic murmur from the crowd. But she's here tonight. He looked at me. Because that's what family does. We come home. More applause. A woman at the table next to mine whispered, "Bless his heart." Then he said it. "Megan, come on up here, sweetheart. Stand with your old man." 200 faces turned to me. The weight of expectation, social, communal, religious, pressed in from every direction. If I stayed seated, I was the ungrateful daughter. If I went up and played along, I was his prop. I stood, picked up my bag, walked to the stage. Richard beamed. He put his arm around my shoulder, the same shoulder he'd gripped in the ER a decade ago, and squeezed. I looked at his hand, then I reached up and gently moved it off. Not violently, not dramatically. I just took his hand and placed it back at his side. The room went quiet, and I saw it in his eyes, for the first time in my life. Fear. I stepped to the microphone. Thank you, Pastor David, for letting me stand here tonight. My voice was steady. I'd practiced this in my apartment 3 times. Not the words, just the steadiness. My father said I've been going through a hard time. He's right. I have, but not for the reasons he told you. Richard moved toward the microphone. Megan, that's enough. I stepped to the side out of his reach and kept going. I was admitted to the county emergency room 5 times before I turned 16. Every time, my parents told the doctors I'd fallen. Every time, the medical staff documented something different. I unzipped my bag and pulled out the manila envelope, Set it on the podium, open, the hospital stamp visible. These are my medical records, my own records, which I have every legal right to share. They describe, and I'm quoting, recurrent injuries inconsistent with stated mechanism. On one visit, the attending physician recommended a Child Protective Services follow-up. It never happened. Silence. Not the comfortable kind, the kind where 200 people realize they're holding their breath. Richard's face had gone white. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. For a man who'd built his entire life around controlling the room had just slipped out from under him. These records are right here, I said, on this podium. I'm not asking anyone to take my word for it. I'm asking you to read. A woman in the second row pressed her hand to her mouth. An older man I recognized from the deacon board leaned forward in his chair, staring at the podium like he was seeing it for the first time. Richard found his voice. She's lying. She's been unstable for years. I told you all. I didn't argue. I just opened the envelope and fanned the pages across the podium. Read, I said. Richard pivoted to Pastor David, who was standing at the side of the stage with his hands frozen at his waist. David, this is a family matter. We don't need to. There's one more thing, I said. I took my phone from my bag and set the Bluetooth speaker on the podium. My hands were calm. I'd checked the volume twice in the parking lot. I pressed play. The sound that filled the fellowship hall was unmistakable. My father's voice, not the warm, measured baritone that charmed 200 church members, but the real one, the one that lived behind closed doors. Low, cold, absolute. You talk back to me one more time. A sharp sound. Something hitting something. Then Ethan, my brother, 18 years old, crying out, "Sit down, shut up. In this house, what I say goes." 4 minutes and 22 seconds. The speaker wasn't loud, but in a room that quiet, it didn't need to be. Every word reached every table. Every gasp was audible. A mother near the back pulled her young son closer. One of the deacons, a man who'd been at the barbecue 2 days earlier laughing at Richard's jokes, stood up and walked out without a word. I stopped the recording. This was recorded by my mother, Linda Moore, in our family home. Last month. Under Ohio law, she had every right to record it. She was present. She consented. I looked at the room. Some faces were stunned. Some were crying. A few looked angry. At me, maybe, or at themselves for not seeing it. One woman near the front was shaking her head slowly, over and over, like she was trying to unsee something. Richard gripped the edge of the podium. You can't, that's private, that's my family. It stopped being private, I said, when it left bruises. A chair scraped at the back of the room. My grandmother stood up. 72 years old, gray cardigan, no-nonsense flats, the kind of woman who irons her napkins and doesn't suffer fools. She didn't walk to the stage. She didn't need to. Her voice carried. My name is Dorothy Jennings. I'm Linda's mother. 16 years ago, I saw bruises on my granddaughter's arms and I called Child Protective Services. Nobody followed up. Because Richard Moore knows everybody in this town, and everybody in this town wanted to believe the lawn was as perfect as it looked. She paused, looked around the room, slowly, deliberately, making eye contact with people she'd known for decades. You all shook his hand every Sunday, I don't blame you, but now you know. She sat down. And then Ethan stood. My brother, 18, thin, still wearing the suit Richard had picked out, and the tie Richard had measured, rose from his chair with his hands trembling at his sides. The room turned to him. I'm Ethan, he said. His voice shook, but he didn't stop. I'm 18, and my dad hits me. My sister is telling the truth. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. He sat back down, and I saw his hands gripping his knees under the table, white-knuckled, holding himself together. Then Linda stood. My mother, who had spent 28 years sitting, standing, walking, breathing within the perimeter of what Richard Moore allowed, stood up in the third row of a church fellowship hall in front of 200 people and said 6 words. I was silent too long. She's right. Then she pressed her hands to her face and cried, 3 people, 3 generations, and a room full of witnesses who could never unhear what they'd just heard. Pastor David stepped forward. He stood at the side of the stage for a long moment, his hand on the back of a chair, looking at the floor. When he looked up, his face carried something I hadn't expected. Not shock, but shame. The quiet, specific shame of a man realizing he'd been standing 3 feet from the truth and looking the other way. Richard, he said. His voice was level, but the warmth was gone. I need to speak with the deacon board. Right now. Richard tried once more. He reached for David's arm, dropped his voice to that intimate, reasonable murmur he'd perfected, the one that had diffused every inconvenient question for 30 years. David, listen to me. This is a misunderstanding. My family's going through a rough... Richard, Pastor David pulled his arm back. Not right now. The room shifted. Not all at once. Not a movie-style moment where everyone stands and claps. It was slower than that, and messier. Some people stared at their plates. Some whispered to each other. A woman I didn't know, mid-50s, glasses, the kind of face you'd see behind a library counter, walked over to me, touched my arm, and said, I'm sorry, sweetheart, I didn't know. Now you do, I said. A few of Richard's closest friends, the barbecue men, the ones who'd heard his version of events for years, sat frozen. One of them got up and left without speaking to anyone. Another stared at Richard with an expression I recognized, the look of a man rearranging everything he thought he knew. Not everyone believed me that night. Some never would. But enough did. I stepped off the stage, walked to Ethan, took his hand. Linda followed. We left through the side door, and I didn't look back. 72 hours. That's how long it took for the life my father had built to come apart. 24 hours after the ceremony, the deacon board met. I wasn't in the room, but Ethan heard from a friend whose father was on the board. The vote to remove Richard from his position was unanimous. Not a single voice in his defense. The same men who'd eaten his pulled pork and laughed at his jokes sat in a circle and voted him out without debate. 48 hours. The 2 largest contracts Richard's company depended on, both sourced through church connections, were canceled. The first was a $180,000 renovation of the church's east wing. The second was a $95,000 community center project for the county, referred by a deacon's brother-in-law. Both pulled out with the same polite, devastating language. We feel it's best to go in a different direction at this time. 72 hours. I drove Linda and Ethan to the county courthouse. We filed for a temporary restraining order. The petition included my medical records, the audio recording, and a sworn statement from Ethan. The judge reviewed it in chambers. Not a dramatic courtroom scene, just a tired woman in a small office reading through pages and listening to 4 minutes of audio on her laptop speakers. She granted the order before lunch. Richard Moore was barred from coming within 100 yards of his wife, his daughter, and his son. He was ordered to vacate the house on Maple Ridge Lane. The house, it turned out, had both their names on the deed. Linda had been on the title since they purchased it in 1998. Richard had acted like he owned it alone for 26 years. He didn't. He packed 2 bags and moved into a rental on the other side of town. The lawn on Maple Ridge was already getting long. The day after the restraining order was granted, Richard walked into First National Bank and withdrew every dollar from Ethan's savings account. $38,000. Gone before the teller finished counting. He thought it was a punishment. One final act of control. If he couldn't own his family, he'd make sure his son paid for leaving. But Grandma Dot had planned for that. Your grandfather always said, "Never let a bully hold the checkbook," she told me over the phone, her voice matter-of-fact, like she was reading a grocery list. I listened. 5 years earlier, quietly, without telling anyone, Dot had opened a 529 education savings account in Ethan's name. $200 a month pulled from her late husband's pension. $12,000. Not a fortune, but enough to keep the door open. And then the church did something I didn't expect. Within a week of the ceremony, a group of women from Grace Baptist, the same women who'd brought casseroles to our house, who'd told my mother what a beautiful family she had, organized a scholarship collection for Ethan. They passed an envelope at the Sunday service. They posted about it on the church Facebook page. They sent checks in the mail. By the following Sunday, $8,400. $12,000 from Dot. $8,400 from the community, a financial aid application that Ethan and I filled out together on my kitchen table on a Tuesday night, eating takeout pizza on paper plates. It wasn't $38,000. It wasn't the golden path Richard had dangled and yanked away, but it was enough. And the best part? Richard's decision to drain the account became the final proof of who he was. The man who stole his own son's college fund out of spite. Even the people who'd been on the fence stopped defending him after that. The leash was cut. 2 weeks after the ceremony, I drove to the house on Maple Ridge. It was strange, pulling into that driveway without the Ford F-250 taking up the whole width of it. The flag was still on the porch. The lawn was uneven. The wreath was last season's. Linda was in the kitchen. Not cooking. Just sitting at the table, looking out the window at the backyard where the barbecue grill still sat, uncovered, rusting at the legs. The house was quieter than I'd ever heard it, and for the first time, the quiet wasn't a warning sign. She didn't look up when I came in, but she spoke. "Do you forgive me?" I pulled out the chair across from her, sat down, looked at my mother, really looked at her, and saw a woman I was still learning how to see. Not the villain, not the hero. Just a person who had been afraid for so long that fear became her personality, and silence became her language, and by the time she found her voice, her daughter had already grown up without one. "I don't know," I said, "and I don't need to know right now." Her face crumbled. "But you stood up," I said. "In that room, in front of everyone, you stood up, and that's the first step." I didn't hug her. I wanted to. Some part of me, the 10-year-old part, the part that had waited in a dark bedroom for her to come back and say it wasn't your fault, wanted to. But I wasn't that girl anymore, and pretending I was would have been a different kind of lie. So I just sat there, beside her, in the kitchen that used to feel like a trap, and now just felt like a kitchen. We didn't say much. That was enough. A year later, the house on Maple Ridge Lane looked different. Not renovated. Linda didn't have the money for that. But the wreath was new. The lawn was mowed, a little unevenly, by Ethan when he was home on weekends. And the refrigerator, the same white Kenmore that had held my father's beer and my mother's leftovers for 20 years, now had a photo of Ethan on it, grinning in a college sweatshirt standing next to a girl I hadn't met yet. My photo was up there, too. A selfie I'd sent Linda, me in my scrubs after a 12-hour shift, tired but smiling. She'd printed it at the CVS and stuck it next to Ethan's with a daisy magnet. It was the first time a picture of me had been on that refrigerator. I was 25. Ethan was doing okay. Not Harvard, not the grand plan Richard had weaponized. A solid community college near Dot's house, engineering track, a part-time job at a hardware store that gave him an employee discount on tools he actually wanted. He called me every Thursday. We mostly talked about nothing. It was the best part of my week. Linda was in therapy. She'd gotten her driver's license, her first, at 50 years old. The day she passed the test, she sent me a photo of herself holding the card, and her smile was the most genuine expression I'd ever seen on her face. We met every other week for coffee. Some visits were good, some were quiet, some were hard. But they existed, and that was more than I'd had for 18 years. Richard lived alone in a one-bedroom rental across town. He'd lost the deacon seat, the contracts, the house, and the story he'd told himself about who he was. Some people still believed him, but fewer every month. He never apologized. I stopped waiting for him to. I'm not telling you this story to teach you something. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a life coach. I'm a nurse who works 60 hours a week and owns one nice pair of shoes. I'm telling you because for 18 years I thought I was the problem. I thought that if I were quieter, softer, more careful, if I could just stop pushing his buttons, my father would stop hurting me. And the person who should have told me that wasn't true was standing right there the whole time, whispering the opposite. So if anyone listening to this right now is sitting in a room where someone keeps telling you that you're the reason things are broken, you're not. You were never the reason. Silence isn't loyalty. Leaving isn't betrayal. And you never owe your image to someone who shattered yours. My mother was wrong for 18 years. But she was right once, the night she pressed record. And that one act of truth, late as it was, changed the course of 3 lives. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive her. Forgiveness isn't a light switch. It's not something you decide once and it's done. It's more like physical therapy. Some days you make progress. Some days it hurts more than the day before. And you show up anyway because the alternative is staying broken. My name is Megan. I'm 25 now. I still live in that studio apartment. I still have the IKEA curtains. And for the first time in my life, I don't flinch when my phone rings. That's enough. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story touched you, like and subscribe. It helps more people hear it. And if you've got a story of your own, the comments are open. No judgment here. If you want to hear more, check the link in the description. Another story about boundaries, family, and the things that paper remembers when people choose to forget. I'll see you in the next one. You know you were an accident, right? I wanted a son. My father said that to my face in front of 31 relatives, 6 Budweisers deep. Standing on the lawn, my mother planted every hydrangea bush by hand. The smoke from his new Weber grill curled up behind him like a halo he didn't deserve. Aunt Carol dropped her paper plate. Potato salad hit the grass. 31 heads turned. Nobody breathed. I didn't flinch. I said, "Funny. Mom told me something different before she died." "Want me to read her letter?" His hand started shaking. That letter held a truth my father had buried for 30 years. And it didn't just ruin his 4th of July. It undid every lie he'd ever told about my mother, about me, and about whose name was really on the deed to the house he called his. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. And wherever you are right now, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know who's listening. My name is Myra. I'm 28. I'm an ICU nurse. Now let me take you back 3 years before that 4th of July, to the day my mom got her diagnosis. The house on Maple Lane was a white colonial with green shutters and a wraparound porch that creaked in 3 places my mother knew by heart. She'd step over the 2nd and 3rd boards every morning when she went out to water her hydrangeas, barefoot, before my father woke up. She moved through that house like someone trying not to be heard. I grew up thinking that was normal. My father, Rex Harper, had a leather lazy boy recliner in the living room, dark brown, cracked at the armrests, positioned dead center facing the television. Nobody sat in it. Not my mother. Not me. Not even Uncle Bill when he visited. It was understood. That chair was his throne, and the rest of us arranged ourselves around it. He controlled everything. The thermostat. 68 in winter, 76 in summer, and if you touched it, God help you. The remote, the grocery list, the dinner schedule. My mother cooked what he wanted, when he wanted it, and cleared the plates before he had to ask. She never had her own bank account. Her name wasn't on the checking account. She'd ask him for grocery money each Monday morning, and he'd pull bills from his wallet one at a time, counting them out loud like she was a cashier making change. I didn't realize that wasn't how other families worked until I was about 14 and spent a weekend at my friend's house and watched her mother swipe a credit card at Target without calling anyone first. The house itself was beautiful. My mother made it that way. The window boxes, the herb garden along the south wall, the porch swing she'd found at an estate sale. She poured everything she couldn't say out loud into that house. And my father called it his. My roof. My rules, he'd say if either of us had an opinion. You don't like it, there's the door. I didn't know yet what I'd eventually learn, that the roof wasn't his at all. Rex Harper was not a complicated man. He believed three things with absolute certainty: that he was the head of the household, that women had supporting roles, and that anyone who challenged either point was disrespectful. What do women know? Was his refrain. He said it at dinner when my mother suggested they refinance. He said it at Thanksgiving when his cousin Linda brought up politics. He said it to me when I told him I'd been accepted into the nursing program at State. Nursing, so you'll be emptying bedpans. Great career for a girl, I guess. My mother never argued. When he raised his voice, she'd go still. Shoulders pulled in, hands folded in her lap, eyes on the tablecloth. I used to think she was being patient. I understand now she was being safe. There was one night I can't shake. I was 16. He'd come home from work in a mood. Something about a parts order going wrong at the store, and he started in on me. My grades, my friends, the length of my shorts. His voice filled the kitchen like a pressure system. I stood at the counter, gripping the edge, refusing to cry, and I saw my mother. She was sitting at the table behind him, and for just a second, half a second, her shoulders dropped. Her breath came out. Relief. Because it was me, not her. Then her eyes met mine, and the relief turned into something I didn't have a word for until I was much older. Guilt. Deep, corrosive guilt. That night she came to my room after he'd fallen asleep in his recliner. She sat on the edge of my bed and whispered, "I'm sorry I can't protect you the way I should." I told her it was fine. It wasn't. The call came on a Tuesday in March. I'd just finished my clinical rotation, 12 hours on my feet in the step-down unit, and I was sitting in my Honda Civic in the hospital parking lot with a cold coffee in the cup holder when my mother's name lit up my phone. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 3. She said it the way she said everything difficult. Quietly, like she was apologizing for the inconvenience. "The doctor says we should talk about treatment options. I didn't want to bother you during your shift." I drove straight home. 2 hours on the interstate with both hands white-knuckled on the wheel. When I got there, my father was in the garage, not with her. In the garage, the door half open, a Budweiser on the workbench, polishing the chrome on his Dodge Ram. He polished that truck every Saturday like it owed him something, never missed a week. But in the 14 months of my mother's chemo and radiation, he did not drive her to the hospital once. Not one single time. I did. Every Tuesday and every other Thursday. I'd pick her up in my Civic, help her into the passenger seat, hold a plastic bag in my lap in case the nausea hit before we got there. I'd sit in the waiting room reading pharmacology notes while they dripped poison into her veins, and then I'd drive her home, help her to bed, and leave a glass of ginger ale on the nightstand. My father's contribution was to complain that dinner was late. During those months, something shifted between my mother and Aunt Carol. Phone calls got longer. Sometimes I'd walk into the kitchen and my mom would lower her voice and say, "I'll call you back, Carol," then smile at me like nothing was happening. I figured they were just being sisters. I had no idea they were building something. My mother died on a Sunday in October. The hospice nurse said it was peaceful, and I believed her, because I was holding my mother's hand when it happened, and I felt the exact moment she stopped gripping back. My father was downstairs watching football. I handled the funeral, the phone calls, the flowers, the obituary in the county paper. Rex sat in his recliner and told people he was too broken up to function, and they believed him because he'd perfected the role of grieving husband the way some men perfect a golf swing, with practice and no actual feeling underneath. 5 months later, he introduced Donna. She showed up at a Sunday dinner wearing a white cashmere sweater and heels that clicked on my mother's hardwood floors. She sat in my mother's chair at the table, the one nearest the kitchen, the one my mother had sat in for 30 years. And Rex didn't even blink. He carved the roast like it was a celebration. Donna Kessler, 40, real estate agent, blonde highlights and a smile that calculated square footage. After dinner, Rex slid a manila folder across the table to me. "Just some administrative paperwork for your mom's estate. Lawyer stuff. Sign where the tabs are, and we'll be done with it. I was exhausted. I was grieving. I was 25 years old and I'd just spent 14 months watching my mother disappear. I signed most of the pages without reading them. There were about 8 or 9 forms. I got through 6 or 7, and then my pager went off. Night shift. ICU. A patient coding. I left the last pages unsigned and told him I'd finish next week. One of those unsigned pages was a quitclaim deed. I didn't know it then. The expired power of attorney form I'd signed by accident? It was already void. Rex just didn't realize it. Rex didn't waste time. Within weeks of that dinner, the phone calls started. But not to me. To everyone else. Uncle Bill got the first one. Then Cousin Patty. Then the neighbors on Maple Lane. Then the women at my mother's old church group. Rex's version of the story went like this. His daughter, whom he'd raised and sacrificed everything for, had abandoned him in his grief. Wouldn't call. Wouldn't visit. Wouldn't even come to dinner. The truth was, I worked 4 night shifts a week and spent my days off sleeping or crying in my apartment. But truth doesn't travel as fast as a victim story told by a man with a deep voice and good timing. Uncle Bill texted me on a Wednesday night at 11 p.m., right after I'd lost a patient. My hands still smelled like nitrile gloves. The message read, "Your dad is alone, Myra. He lost his wife. Don't be selfish." Then a follow-up 2 minutes later, a link to an article titled, "When Adult Children Abandon Aging Parents, a Growing Crisis." I stared at my phone in the break room and felt something I hadn't felt since I was 16. That old, familiar shrinking, like I was the problem. I typed a response. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. What do you say to an uncle who's known you your whole life, but has never once asked for your side of the story? I called Uncle Bill the next morning and tried to explain. The shifts, the exhaustion, the fact that Rex had never once visited me. Bill listened for about 45 seconds and then said, "He's your father, Myra. You only get one." After that, I stopped trying to explain. There's a difference between people who don't understand and people who don't want to. I didn't know yet that Rex was building toward something specific. That the Whisper campaign wasn't grief. It was strategy. I went back to the house on Maple Lane in April to pick up a box of my mother's things I'd left in the upstairs closet. Old photo albums, mostly, and a scarf that still smelled like her Chanel No. 5. The front door was unlocked. I let myself in and stopped 3 steps past the threshold. The living room looked the same. Rex's lazy boy, the TV on mute, beer cans on the side table. But something was different in the air. A different perfume. Something sweet and synthetic. I went upstairs. My parents' bedroom door was open. The wedding photo that had hung above the dresser for as long as I could remember. My mother in a simple ivory dress, laughing, her hand on my father's chest, was gone. The nail was still in the wall. In its place, Donna had hung a framed print of a beach sunset. My mother's vanity, the oak one with the oval mirror, the one she'd sit at every morning to put on her lipstick even when she was too sick to leave the house, was covered in Donna's things. Brushes, compacts. A bottle of Victoria's Secret body mist where my mother's Chanel No. 5 used to be. Donna appeared from the master bathroom in a terry cloth robe, toweling her hair. She looked at me without surprise. "Oh, your dad said you wouldn't mind." I heard Rex's voice from the bottom of the stairs. "Myra, quit snooping. This isn't your room anymore." I almost left. Almost just took my box and drove away. But I passed through the living room on the way out. And there on the coffee table, tucked under a TV guide, was a folder with a real estate logo on it, Donna's agency. Inside, a comparable market analysis for 414 Maple Lane. Estimated value, $280,000. He wasn't just moving on from my mother. He was selling her house. That was the first time I thought, he's not just cruel. He's planning something. 2 weeks later, Rex called me. First time in months he'd dialed my number instead of Uncle Bill's. "Come to dinner Friday," he said. "Donna's making pot roast." The invitation alone should have been a red flag. My father had never once asked me to dinner. He announced it or he expected it. but he didn't ask. I went anyway. The table was set for 3. Donna had put out cloth napkins and a candle. Staging, I realized later, like she was showing a house. The pot roast was fine, the wine was cheap. My father was on his best behavior, which meant he only interrupted me twice. After the plates were cleared, Rex reached behind his chair and produced another manila folder. Same kind as before. He placed it between us on the table, square to the edge, like it was nothing. The lawyer said we missed one form from last time. Just transfers the property title into my name for estate management. Standard stuff. I opened the folder. 1 page. The heading read, Quitclaim Deed. Below it, in plain language, transfer of all right, title, and interest in the real property at 414 Maple Lane from estate of Ellen Whitmore Harper to Rex A. Harper. I read it twice. Donna appeared at my elbow with a pen. It's really standard, Myra. I see these all the time in real estate. I looked at my father. He was watching me with that expression I'd seen 1,000 times, the one that meant do what I say and don't ask questions. I need to have my own lawyer look at this, I said. His jaw tightened. Lawyer? You don't trust your own father? If it's just paperwork, I said, then there's no rush. I'll have someone look at it. I took the quitclaim deed, put it in my bag, and drove straight to Aunt Carol's house. Carol Whitmore lived in a brick ranch house 12 miles outside of town, the kind of place that smelled like coffee and tax returns. She was a CPA, had been for 25 years, and her kitchen table had seen more W-2s than family dinners. She opened the door before I knocked, like she'd been expecting me. I put the quitclaim deed on her oak kitchen table, the same table I would later learn, where she and my mother had sat 2 years before my mother died, signing documents of their own. Carol picked up the form. Read it once. Her face went still. Not surprised. Something worse. Confirmed. He's trying to take the house, she said. Then she looked at me. Myra, the house was never his. She said it simply, the way she said everything. Carol didn't do drama, she did facts. Your mother bought that house with inheritance money from your grandparents, the Whitmores, $180,000. The deed is in her name, Ellen Whitmore Harper. Rex's name is not on it. It was never on it. I stared at her. 30 years my father had called that house his. 30 years, Carol continued. Your mother made a will, a real one, with a lawyer, Richard Avery, downtown. The house goes to you. It's already been through probate. It's yours, Myra. It's been yours since your mother died. I couldn't speak. Carol gave me a moment. Then she stood, walked to the filing cabinet in her home office, and came back with a sealed envelope. Cream-colored, my mother's handwriting on the front, in her careful cursive, for Myra, when she's ready. Your mother left this too, Carol said. She told me to give it to you when you needed it. I think you need it. I held the envelope with both hands. Read it when you're ready, Carol said. But don't read it alone. I didn't open it that night. I sat in my car in Carol's driveway for 20 minutes, engine off, holding the letter my mother had written for me from the other side of death, and I thought about every time my father had said my house, my rules, and how my mother must have sat there listening, knowing the truth, saying nothing. She couldn't fight him while she was alive, so she fought him on paper. The next morning, I called the law office of Richard Avery. His receptionist put me through in under a minute, which told me he'd been briefed. He had a calm, deliberate voice, the kind of man who read every line before signing anything, which was exactly what my mother had needed. Ms. Harper, I've been expecting your call, honestly, for about a year now. He confirmed everything Carol had told me. The will was valid. It had been filed, entered into probate, and executed. The house at 414 Maple Lane, deed recorded under Ellen Whitmore Harper, had transferred to me upon my mother's death as the sole named beneficiary. The paperwork was clean. The title was clear. Your father has no legal claim to the property, Avery said. He can reside there as a guest, but he cannot sell it, cannot mortgage it, and cannot transfer title without your signature on a quitclaim deed. Which, I assume, is why you're calling. I told him about the form Rex had handed me. Avery paused. Then, I should tell you something else. About 18 months ago, before your mother passed, a loan officer at First Regional contacted me because someone had applied for a second mortgage on 414 Maple Lane. The applicant was Rex Harper. The bank flagged it because his name wasn't on the deed. They denied the application. My stomach dropped. Your mother found out, Avery said. That's when she called Carol. That's when we finalized the will and set up the trust. The trust. I hadn't even gotten to that part yet. $220,000, Avery said. Held in a revocable trust, naming you as beneficiary. Funded from your mother's separate inheritance. Mr. Harper has no access and no knowledge of its current balance. I sat in my apartment, the phone pressed to my ear, doing the math my mother had done when she was dying. A week later, Rex called again. 4th of July BBQ, he said. Whole family's coming. Bring that paperwork signed. I told him I'd be there. But I wasn't bringing his paperwork. I was bringing my mother's. 4th of July on Maple Lane looked like a postcard. My father had gone all out. Or rather, his credit card had. A brand new Weber Genesis grill sat on the patio like a chrome altar, still wearing its price tag tan line where the sticker had been peeled off that morning. Red, white, and blue bunting hung from the porch rails. A folding table ran the length of the backyard, covered in a checkered cloth, weighed down with coleslaw and corn and coolers of Bud Light. 31 people. I counted when I arrived. Uncle Bill and his wife Linda, holding court near the potato salad. Cousin Patty with her 3 kids chasing sparklers across the grass. Rex's co-worker friends from the auto parts store. Neighbors. Church people. The full arsenal of social pressure assembled on lawn chairs and picnic blankets under a cloudless sky. And Donna, standing at the head of the table in a white sundress and new sandals, holding a glass of Prosecco, laughing at something Uncle Bill said, playing the hostess in my mother's yard beside my mother's hydrangeas, under the string lights my mother had hung 3 summers ago. I came straight from a 12-hour shift. I was still wearing my scrubs. Seal blue, wrinkled at the knees, my badge clipped to my chest. I hadn't changed on purpose. Those scrubs were the only honest thing I could put on that day. Every person there knew what I did for a living. Every person there knew I'd been the one at my mother's bedside. The scrubs were my quiet reminder. Aunt Carol was already seated near the back, a paper plate balanced on her knee, sunglasses on. When I walked through the side gate, her eyes found mine immediately. She gave me one small nod. I had the envelope in my scrub pocket. Beside it, a folded copy of the will, notarized, and a printout of the recorded deed. My father saw me arrive. He saw my empty hands. No manila folder, no signed form. His smile stayed in place, but something behind his eyes went flat. There she is, he announced to the yard. I told her to come. She finally listens. By 5 o'clock, Rex was 6 beers in. I know because I watched him drink each one. It's a reflex from the ICU. You count inputs and outputs. You track vitals. You note the moment a patient crosses a threshold. My father crossed his threshold around beer number 4, when his voice shifted from conversational to performance. He'd positioned himself near the grill, the center of gravity, where people came to him. He flipped burgers with one hand and gestured with the Budweiser in the other, telling stories louder than they needed to be told. Old stories. Stories about his glory days managing the store, about the truck he'd restored in 2004, about the time he'd told off a county inspector. Man stories, the kind that started with I and ended with everyone else being wrong. Around beer 5, he started in on family. You know, he said, loud enough for the nearest cluster of lawn chairs to hear. I always thought I'd have a boy. Somebody to take over. Teach him the business, pass something down. He shook his head, smiling like he was telling a joke. Didn't work out that way. A few people chuckled politely. Donna refilled his cooler from behind, sliding another can into his hand like she was loading a weapon. Uncle Bill leaned in from his Adirondack chair. Yeah, A son would have been something. I was sitting at the far end of the table, on one of those low aluminum folding chairs, the kind they keep stacked in garages for overflow guests. It put me about 6 inches below everyone else. I ate my potato salad slowly and I didn't respond. Rex looked over at me. I saw it happen. The way a drunk man talks himself into something. He straightened up. He cleared his throat. He took a long pull of beer number 6. And then he said it. "You know you were an accident, right?" He said it standing. He said it facing me. He said it at a volume that cut through every side conversation, every child's laugh, every pop of a distant firecracker. I wanted a son. The yard went silent the way a room goes silent when glass breaks. Not gradually, but all at once, like someone had pulled the plug on the noise. 31 people, every single one of them looking at me. My Aunt Carol's paper plate hit the ground. Potato salad, a scoop of coleslaw, a deviled egg. All of it in the grass. She didn't pick it up. She just stood there, her hand still in the shape of holding something. Rex wasn't done. "But your mother insisted on keeping you." He tilted his beer toward me like a pointer. "And look how you turned out. A nurse who can't even afford her own apartment." Somebody's kid asked for a sparkler. Nobody answered. Then Donna stepped forward from behind Rex, and I saw what she was carrying. The manila folder, the quitclaim deed, and a pen. A silver ballpoint, expensive looking, the kind agents give clients at closings. "Honey," Donna said, her voice dropping into that soothing register real estate agents use when they want you to ignore the foundation cracks. "Your dad just needs you to sign this so he can take care of the house. It's what your mom would have wanted." She placed the folder and the pen on the table in front of me, right next to my paper plate, like it was dessert. Rex turned to the crowd. "This is a family matter," he said. "My daughter's been difficult about some basic estate paperwork. I just need a signature. That's it." Uncle Bill, from his chair. "Just sign it, kid. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." A woman I barely recognized, some second cousin of my father's, murmured, "Poor Rex. He just wants to keep the house." 31 pairs of eyes, some sympathetic, some uncomfortable, some looking at their shoes. I looked at the pen. I looked at the paper. I looked at my father, standing in the yard my mother had planted, wearing the confidence of a man who had never once been told no by the women in his life. And I felt the envelope in my scrub pocket, pressing against my ribs like a second heartbeat. I picked up the pen. I need you to understand. I picked it up. I held it between my fingers and I looked at the line where my name was supposed to go, and for one terrible second I understood my mother completely. Because this is what it feels like. This is what she lived with every single day. The weight of 31 stairs. The math your body does before your brain catches up. If I just sign, this stops. If I just agree, the silence goes away. If I just give him what he wants, I can leave and breathe and never think about this table again. I understood in that moment how my mother had spent 30 years saying yes to a man who never deserved it. Not because she was weak, because the cost of no was a room full of people deciding you were the problem. Rex watched me hold that pen, and I saw it. A flicker of victory in his eyes. He thought he had me. He thought the pressure and the crowd and the beer-soaked cruelty had done what it always did. "Don't embarrass me in front of the whole family, Myra," he said, quieter now, leaning in. Almost gentle. The way he'd say it to my mother when she hesitated. A cousin shifted in his lawn chair. Someone's toddler whined. The charcoal in the grill popped. I held that pen for 5 full seconds. And then I put it down. I set it on the table, parallel to the quitclaim deed, precisely and deliberately, the way I set instruments on a surgical tray. No. One word. No volume behind it. No tremor. Just the flattest, cleanest syllable I'd ever spoken. Rex blinked. "Excuse me. I'm not signing this. Not today. Not ever." The yard stayed silent, but the quality of the silence changed, from shock to something else. Anticipation. My father's face went the color of the charcoal in his grill. Not red with embarrassment. Red with fury. The kind I knew from childhood. the kind that used to make my mother disappear into the kitchen and close the door softly behind her. You ungrateful. He caught himself. Recalibrated. Looked at the crowd, then back at me. You're just like your mother. Useless and stubborn. He said it louder than he needed to, because Rex always needed witnesses when he was right. Your mother didn't leave anything behind worth talking about. A vanity table and some dead flowers. That's her legacy. And you, he jabbed a finger in my direction. You're standing here making a scene because you can't bring yourself to do one simple thing for the man who raised you. Donna touched his arm. Rex, maybe we should... Quiet. He shook her off without looking at her. Donna's hand dropped. She took a half step back. Uncle Bill sat motionless in his Adirondack chair. Cousin Patty pulled her youngest onto her lap. A neighbor I'd known since childhood found something fascinating in his coleslaw. Rex wasn't done. He never was. He'd built a lifetime on having the last word, and he must have felt it slipping, because what he said next was the thing he should never have said. He looked right at me, and his voice dropped to that register, the one that pretended to be calm, but was really just cruelty in a lower key. Your mother was too weak to do anything right, including raising you. The yard was so quiet I could hear the flag snapping on the pole 2 houses down. That was the line. Not what he'd said about me. I could carry that. I'd been carrying it for 28 years. But he said it about her. The woman who spent her last months alive making sure I'd be standing exactly here. Exactly now. With exactly what I needed. He said it about my mother. And something in me locked into place. I stood up. Not fast. Not angry. I stood up the way I stand up at a patient's bedside when their vitals are crashing. Steady, controlled, already 3 steps ahead. I pushed the quitclaim deed across the table toward Rex. The paper slid over the checkered cloth and stopped against a bowl of baked beans. I'm not signing this, I said. Not today, not ever. Rex's mouth opened. For a man who always had something to say, he suddenly looked like he was buffering. And I'd be careful about what you say next about my mother. His eyes narrowed. Or what? I reached into the chest pocket of my scrubs, the one over my heart, where I usually kept a penlight, and I pulled out a cream-colored envelope, handwritten, sealed until 2 nights ago, when I'd finally opened it at Aunt Carol's kitchen table with a cup of tea and a box of tissues. I held it up so the whole yard could see it. Funny, I said. Mom told me something different before she died. Rex's eyes locked on the envelope. I could see him trying to calculate. What was it? What did she write? What could she possibly have said? Want me to read her letter? The yard held its breath. Rex's right hand, the one holding the Budweiser, started to tremble. Not a lot. Just enough. The aluminum can made a tiny crinkling sound in the silence. He knew. He didn't know what was in it. But he knew his wife. And he knew that a woman who'd been silent for 30 years doesn't write a letter unless she has something to say. I didn't wait for permission. I slid my finger under the flap. It had already been opened and resealed with a piece of tape from the night I'd first read it at Carol's. And I unfolded the pages. 3 sheets of cream stationery, front and back, in my mother's careful cursive. The handwriting was steady. Not the handwriting of a sick woman. Not yet. Rex took a step toward me. Give me that. Whatever your mother wrote, she wasn't in her right. She wrote this 2 years before the diagnosis, Rex. That was Aunt Carol. She hadn't moved from her spot near the back, but her voice carried across the yard like it had been waiting for this exact frequency. I was there when she wrote it. I watched her sign it. Uncle Bill turned in his chair. Carol? What's going on? Carol didn't answer him. She was looking at Rex. Rex stopped walking. He looked from Carol to me, then to the letter, then back to Carol. His tongue moved across his lower lip. A nervous habit I'd noticed 1,000 times, always just before he lied. This is ridiculous, he said. Ellen didn't... You had your speech, Dad. I kept my voice flat. I see you flat. The voice I use when a family member is screaming and I need them to hear me without raising my volume. Now it's Mom's turn. Donna stood 3 feet behind Rex, clutching her Prosecco glass with both hands. She looked like a woman watching the open house fall through. I looked down at the first page. A breeze came through the yard. Warm, smelling like charcoal and cut grass and someone's sparklers. And it fluttered the edges of the stationery in my hands. 31 people leaned forward without realizing it. I began to read. "My sweet Myra," I read aloud, and my voice only broke on the second word. I swallowed it down, the way I've learned to swallow things down in rooms full of people who need me steady. If you're reading this, I'm not there anymore, and I'm sorry. Not for dying, for all the years I was alive and didn't say what I should have said. The yard was so still I could hear the ice shifting in the coolers. I kept reading. Your father told everyone, that you were an accident. That he wanted a son. He's said it so many times that I think he believes it now. But I need you to know the truth. Because the truth is the only thing I have left to give you. Rex said, "Myra, that's enough." I didn't look up. I wanted you, Myra. I wanted you more than I have ever wanted anything. I spent 2 years in a fertility clinic, 2 years of progesterone injections every week, blood draws every month, appointments I drove to alone because your father said it was a waste of money. He didn't want a child. Not a son, not a daughter. He said we couldn't afford it. He said he wasn't ready. He said, and these are his exact words, "Kids are a money pit. I'd rather buy a boat." A ripple went through the crowd. Cousin Patty put her hand over her mouth. Uncle Bill sat forward in his chair. "When I finally got pregnant," I continued, he said, "Fine. But if it's not a boy, don't expect me to be excited." And then you came. You came. And you were everything. I paused, breathed. Rex's face was a color I'd never seen before. Not anger, not embarrassment. Something underneath both. Something old. "He told everyone you were an accident," I read, because the truth embarrassed him. That a man who called himself the head of the house had to be begged by his wife to become a father. That he fought it every step of the way. That he only agreed because I told him I'd leave if he said no one more time. Carol spoke from the back of the yard. Quiet. Final. "She wrote this 2 years before the diagnosis, Rex. She wasn't confused. She wasn't medicated. She was clear." Rex said nothing. His 6th Budweiser hung at his side, forgotten, dripping condensation onto his shoe. Rex moved. It was fast. The lunge of a man who'd spent his whole life being the one who decided when a conversation was over. He crossed the 2 steps between us and reached for the letter, hand open, fingers grasping. "Give me that." Jake Whitmore stood up from the picnic bench. 25 years old, Carol's son, 6'1" in work boots. He'd been eating quietly the whole time, and now he was standing between Rex and me with his hands at his sides. Not aggressive, not theatrical, just there. "Uncle Rex." Jake's voice was the opposite of Rex's, low, steady, unbothered. "Let her finish." Rex looked at Jake like he'd been slapped by a piece of furniture. In Rex's world, younger men didn't interrupt older men. It didn't compute. "This is none of your business, boy." "It's a family gathering," Jake said. "Seems like family business to me." Rex spun toward the crowd, arms wide, searching for backup. "Is nobody going to—" "This is my family. My house. My—" "Is it?" That was me. 2 words. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Rex stopped. The word "my" hung in the air between us like a challenge, and for the first time in my life, I watched my father hear it. Uncle Bill hadn't moved from his Adirondack chair. He was staring at Rex with an expression I'd never seen on him before. Not loyalty. Something closer to doubt. Donna had drifted backward, Prosecco abandoned on the table. She was standing near the side gate, clutching her car keys. Nobody was on Rex's side of the yard anymore. Not literally. People hadn't moved. But the gravity had shifted. 31 people were looking at my father, and for the first time, they weren't looking up. I turned to the second page. "The next part," I said. "This is the part that's going to matter." I smoothed the second page against my palm and read, "Myra, there's something about the house I need you to know. Your father has called it his for as long as you can remember. My roof. My rules. You've heard it 1,000 times. So has everyone else. I could see heads nodding slightly around the yard. They'd heard it too. But the house at 414 Maple Lane was purchased with $180,000 from my parents, your grandparents, David and Ruth Whitmore. It was their money, an early inheritance they gave me when your father and I were first married, because they wanted me to have something that was mine. I felt the stillness deepen. This wasn't the silence of shock anymore. This was the silence of something clicking into place. The deed is in my name. Ellen Whitmore Harper. Your father's name has never been on it. He didn't pay for it. He didn't co-sign for it. It is not his house. It has never been his house. Rex's face went white. Not gradually, all at once, like a screen losing power. I made a will. I continued reading. A legal will, prepared by attorney Richard Avery and witnessed by my sister Carol. The house goes to you, Myra. It was filed and entered into probate after my death. By the time you read this, the title has already transferred. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out the 2 documents I'd brought, a photocopy of the recorded deed and a certified copy of the relevant page of my mother's will. I placed them on the table, face up, next to the quitclaim deed Rex had wanted me to sign. 3 pieces of paper. His lie next to her truth. Donna spoke first. She was still by the gate, car keys in hand, and her voice had the flat tone of a woman doing a title search in her head. Rex, you told me the house was yours. Rex didn't look at her. It is my house. I lived here 30 years. Carol's voice came from behind me, steady as a closing statement. Living in a house doesn't make it yours, Rex. Paying for it does, and you didn't. Uncle Bill stared at the deed on the table. He didn't touch it. He didn't speak, but his jaw was working like he was chewing through 30 years of conversations that had just changed meaning. Rex stood in the middle of his own backyard barbecue, surrounded by 31 people who'd come for hot dogs, and he had nothing left to say. His hand, the one that had pointed at me, grabbed for my letter, held his beer like a scepter, was shaking. I didn't need to yell. The deed spoke louder than anything I could have said. There's more, I said. I didn't say it loudly. I said it the way you say the labs came back to a patient's family when the news isn't over yet. I turned back to my mother's letter. Before I died, I read, I discovered something that made me realize I couldn't leave this to chance. Your father applied for a second mortgage on our home, a home he does not own, through First Regional Bank. The loan officer called our family attorney because Rex's name wasn't on the deed. The application was denied. I looked up. Rex was staring at me like I was reading his autopsy report while he was still alive. That's when I knew, I read. That's when I called Carol. That's when we went to see Richard Avery and made everything official. The will. The trust. This letter. Because if your father would try to borrow against a house he doesn't own while I was alive, I had no doubt he'd try to take it from you after I was gone. I set the letter down. The yard processed it in waves. First, the closer relatives. Uncle Bill pressing his fingers to the bridge of his nose, Cousin Patty whispering something to her husband. Then the outer ring. The neighbors exchanging glances, the church ladies going very quiet. And then, Donna. She was already halfway through the gate, but she stopped and turned back. Her voice had lost every trace of that warm, soothing, open house cadence. Rex, did you try to mortgage a house that wasn't yours? Baby, I can explain. I'm a real estate agent, Rex. She held her car keys like a verdict. I know what fraud looks like. The gate clicked shut behind her. A moment later, an engine turned over in the driveway and tires rolled across gravel, and Donna Kessler was gone. Rex watched the gate for a long 3 seconds. Then he sat down in his lawn chair like somebody had cut his strings. There was 1 page left. I almost didn't read it. The first 2 had done the work. The facts, the evidence, the architecture of a lie dismantled in public. But the last page wasn't about property or mortgages. It was about something harder. My hands trembled for the first time all afternoon, not from fear, from grief. "I have one more thing to say," I read, "and this one is for me, not for him." The crowd didn't move. Somewhere on the next block, someone set off a bottle rocket. It whistled and popped, and nobody flinched. "I spent 30 years married to your father, and I never once said no to him. I never argued. I never raised my voice. I never left, even when I should have. I told myself it was for you, that I was keeping the family together. But the truth is, I was afraid." My voice cracked. I let it. The thing I'm most ashamed of, the thing that keeps me up at 3 a.m. when the pain medication wears off, is that every time he yelled at you instead of me, some part of me was relieved. And then I hated myself for it, every single time. Cousin Patty was crying. She wasn't the only one. Uncle Bill stood from his chair, walked to the edge of the patio, and stopped there with his back to everyone, hands in his pockets, head down. "I can't change what I did and didn't do," I read. "But I can give you what I never had. The house is yours. The trust Carol helped me set up. $220,000. That's yours too. That's my apology and my love in the same envelope." I read the last line slowly, because my mother had underlined it twice. "You were not an accident, Myra. You were the thing I fought hardest for. Don't be afraid to say what I never could. You are allowed to say no." I folded the letter. 3 sheets of cream stationery, back into the envelope, back into my pocket against my heart. Rex sat in his lawn chair with his 6th beer leaking onto the grass beside him, surrounded by 31 people who could no longer look him in the eye. He didn't say a word. For a long moment, the only sounds were the flag 2 houses down and a dog barking somewhere on the next street. The grill was still smoking. The food was still out. The string lights my mother had hung were starting to glow against the early evening sky. Nobody left. Nobody spoke. It was like the whole yard was holding its breath, waiting to find out what kind of family they were going to be now. Rex looked around. He turned his head slowly, searching for the faces that had always been on his side. The people who'd nodded when he said my house, who'd laughed when he said I wanted a son, who'd texted me to call him more. Nobody met his gaze. The second cousin who'd murmured "poor Rex" 10 minutes earlier was sitting with her plate in her lap, staring at the grass. Her eyes were red. Rex tried. "You're all going to believe a dead woman over me?" It landed like a stone in a pond. Ripples, then silence. Nobody answered. Jake said from the picnic bench without heat, "We're going to believe a notarized will and a property deed, Uncle Rex." Carol walked forward, stopping beside me. She didn't touch me, but I could feel her steadiness like a wall. "Rex," she said, "Richard Avery has all the original documents. I'd suggest you contact your own attorney." A pause. "You're going to need one." I gathered the papers from the table. The deed, the will, the unsigned quitclaim, and stacked them neatly. I tucked the letter back into my scrub pocket. I pushed in my chair. Then I said the last thing I was going to say to my father at that table. "I'm not selling this house. I'm not signing anything. And I'm not asking for your permission." I looked at him once more. The man in the lawn chair, in the yard he didn't own, holding the authority that no longer worked. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Not pitiable, just accurately sized, for the first time. I walked out through the side gate. Carol and Jake followed. Behind me, 31 people sat with their paper plates and their sparklers and the ruins of a story they'd believed for 30 years. Here's what happened next, because I know you're wondering. Richard Avery sent a formal letter to Rex the following Monday. Certified mail, return receipt requested. It stated, in plain legal language, that the property at 414 Maple Lane was owned by Myra Ellen Harper, pursuant to the last will and testament of Ellen Whitmore Harper, that the decedent's estate had been fully administered through probate, and that Rex A. Harper was occupying the property without legal right. He was given 60 days to vacate. Standard. By the book. No theatrics. Rex didn't hire a lawyer. I don't think he could afford one. The credit card debt alone was $38,000. I learned this later from Uncle Bill, who'd seen a statement on Rex's kitchen counter. Add the auto loan on the Dodge Ram, plus whatever he'd spent on the Weber grill and Donna's dinners, and the life of a man pretending to be richer than he was, and there was nothing left. The house he'd tried to sell, estimated at $280,000 by Donna's own market analysis, had never been his to sell. The second mortgage he'd tried to take out had been denied because his name wasn't on the deed. The quitclaim deed he'd tried to get me to sign would have been the only way to make any of it work, and I hadn't signed it. His entire plan had depended on one thing, his daughter being too afraid to say no. Donna stopped answering his calls within a week, blocked his number by the end of the month. I have no ill will toward Donna. She was looking for a man with assets, and Rex had presented himself as one. That's not love, but it's also not my problem. The trust my mother had set up held $220,000, enough to pay off my student loans, establish an emergency fund, and still have money left over for the future. My mother had planned this from a hospital bed. While Rex was in the garage polishing his truck, she was in the kitchen with Carol, building a firewall out of ink and notary stamps. Uncle Bill called me 2 weeks after the barbecue. I was sitting on the porch of the Maple Lane house, my house, drinking coffee and watching the hydrangeas catch the morning light, and his name appeared on my phone. My first instinct was to let it ring. The last time Bill had reached out, it was to call me selfish and send me an article about bad daughters. I picked up anyway. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "I owe you an apology, kid." I waited. I believed everything he told me, that you wouldn't visit, that you didn't care, that he was doing this all on his own. A pause. "I just found out from Carol that you were the only one who took your mother to chemo, every appointment, for over a year. And Rex told me," he looked me in the eye and told me, "that you refused to help." I closed my eyes and felt the familiar ache of a lie that had done its damage long before the truth arrived. "He told me a lot of things," Bill said, "about the house, about your mother, about everything, and I believed him, because he's my brother, and I'm sorry." "Thank you, Uncle Bill," I said. "That means more than you know." He cleared his throat. "One more thing. A few months back he asked me to co-sign a personal loan, $20,000. I said no because it didn't feel right." A tired laugh. "I guess now I know why." Before he hung up, he said the thing that mattered most. "Your mom would have been proud of you, Myra." I sat on that porch for a long time after that call. I moved back into the house on Maple Lane at the end of August, after Rex's 60 days were up. He'd already gone by the time I arrived with my boxes. He'd left the place cleaner than I expected. The kitchen wiped down, the garbage taken out. Whether that was guilt or pride, I'll never know. Maybe some combination that Rex would never have the vocabulary to explain. The lazy boy was gone. He'd taken it with him. The one piece of furniture in the house that was indisputably his. The living room looked bigger without it. Brighter. I donated the spot to a reading chair I found at the same estate sale circuit my mother used to love. The first thing I did was hang the wedding photo back up. I'd found it in the garage, in a box labeled "Donate" in Rex's handwriting. The photo, my mother's winter coat, some books she'd loved, and, at the very bottom, wrapped in a dish towel, the Chanel No. 5. The bottle was nearly empty. I set it on the vanity where it had always been. Carol came over that first evening with a tray of lasagna and a bottle of wine that cost more than anything Rex had ever put on the table. We sat at the kitchen counter and didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Jake helped me carry boxes upstairs. He didn't say anything profound. He just pointed at the master bedroom door and said, "You taking that room?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I am." That night, I sat at my mother's vanity for the first time. I looked at myself in the oval mirror she'd looked into every morning for 30 years. I placed the letter on the vanity, leaning against the mirror. Then I went outside and watered the hydrangeas. I lived in my mother's house. Not my father's house. Hers. And now mine. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd signed that paper at the barbecue. If I'd folded the way he expected. The way my mother always had. If I'd become her for one more generation. And then I think, she wrote that letter so I wouldn't have to be. She spent her last good months making sure I'd have the ground to stand on and the proof to back it up. Is there someone in your life you've been afraid to say no to? Someone who's been telling your story for you, louder than you can tell it yourself? I'd love to hear about it in the comments. 6 months after the barbecue, I got an update on Rex from Uncle Bill. He'd moved into Bill's spare bedroom. He was working extra shifts at the auto parts store. Still assistant manager. Still resentful about it, but now without the safety net of a house he'd never owned to fall back on. Bill said Rex spent most evenings in the spare room watching TV on a small screen he'd brought from Maple Lane. He didn't talk much about the barbecue. He didn't talk much about anything. Donna had blocked him on everything. Phone, email, social media. She'd moved on to a new listing and, presumably, a new man with a verified deed. I can't say I blamed her. Rex hadn't called me. Not once in 6 months. I hadn't called him either, but I wanted to be clear about something. I didn't tell him he could never reach out. I didn't slam a door. I said what I'd needed to say, and then I waited. If he calls, I told Carol one Sunday over coffee, I'll answer. But he has to start with the truth. The real truth, not the Rex Harper version. Carol nodded. And if he doesn't call? Then that's his choice. I meant it. I was at peace with both outcomes. The one where my father found the courage to be honest for the first time in his life, and the one where he didn't. Either way, I was standing in my own house, paying my own bills, sleeping in a room where the vanity smelled like Chanel No. 5, and nobody was going to hand me a pen and tell me to sign away what my mother had given me. People ask me if it was worth it. The confrontation, the letter, the barbecue. They want to know if I feel vindicated, if revenge tastes as good as they say. Here's what I'll tell you. I didn't do it for revenge. I didn't stand up at that table because I wanted to humiliate my father. I stood up because my mother asked me to. Not in those words, but in every word she wrote in that letter. She asked me to be the woman she couldn't be, and the smallest thing I could do to honor that was to open my mouth, when she would have closed hers. My mother lived 30 years in fear. She cooked his meals and folded his shirts, and sat in the passenger seat of her own life. And the one thing she couldn't forgive herself for was that she let him aim his anger at me, because it meant he wasn't aiming it at her. She wrote that in the letter. She didn't dress it up or make excuses. She just said it, plainly, the way she should have been able to say everything. I don't hate my father. I want to be clear about that. Hate takes energy I'd rather spend on 12-hour shifts and hydrangea bushes and Sunday dinners with Carol and Jake. What I feel for Rex is something quieter and more precise. A recognition that he is a man who was given a family and treated it like a possession. And when the receipts came out, he had nothing in his name. I learned something that 4th of July. Boundaries aren't selfish. Silence isn't always peace. And the people who tell you to keep the family together are usually the ones who aren't being torn apart by it. My mother taught me all of this. She just had to die first to say it out loud. And I think that's the part that hurts the most. This morning, before my shift, I went out to water the hydrangeas. It was early, 6 a.m., the light still thin and blue, the street quiet. I stood in the yard in my bare feet the way my mother used to, stepping over the second and third porch boards out of habit, even though I'd fixed them both in September. She planted those bushes the first spring after they moved in. Rex wanted to pull them out, said they took up too much of the yard, that he wanted space for a grill and a horseshoe pit. My mother said no. One of the only times she did. She stood in the garden with dirt on her knees and a trowel in her hand and said, "These stay." And they stayed. For 30 years, through every argument and every silence, and every time Rex said "my house" in front of company, those hydrangeas kept blooming, blue and purple and stubborn and alive. I think about that a lot. How my mother lost almost every battle in that marriage except the flowers. How she picked the one thing she was willing to fight for and held onto it with both hands in the dirt. She couldn't keep herself safe, but she kept the hydrangeas, and she kept the deed, and she kept the letter. I turned off the hose and stood in the yard. My yard. The house glowed white behind me in the early light. If you asked me whether what I did was revenge, I'd say no. It wasn't revenge. It was a promise my mother made me keep. I think she'd like that. That's my story. Thank you for staying until the end. I know it was a long one, and I know some parts were hard to hear. They were hard to tell. If anything in this story felt familiar, if you've sat at a table where someone tried to make you small, if you've held a pen over a paper you knew you shouldn't sign, if you've loved someone who couldn't protect you and forgave them anyway, I'd like to hear about it. The comments are open, and I read everyone. If this story meant something to you, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. Not for the algorithm, for the next person who needs to hear that it's okay to say no to someone who raised you. And if you haven't had enough yet, there's another story linked in the description about a woman whose family tried to erase her seat at the Thanksgiving table. She didn't have a letter from her mother. She had something else. I think you'll want to hear how that one ends. I'm Myra. I'm 28. I'm an ICU nurse, and I live in my mother's house on Maple Lane, where the hydrangeas bloom every summer whether anyone gives them permission or not.